many partnering organizations for this important town hall. I know there are a lot of questions and issues to discuss, and so I look forward to answering all of your questions. But also, more importantly, I'd like to hear your suggestions and your feelings and concerns about all the issues that affect our Asian American community here in New York and far beyond. So let's get started.
For the questions, I just want to remind everybody to speak directly into the mic that's given to you. Speak only one at a time so that everyone can hear. Please also be mindful of the length of your questions so that our panel, currently just Senator Liu, has enough time to answer for this evening. Let's all remain courteous, respectful at all times, and thank you all for your cooperation. For the first question, I'm going to ask Mr. Young-Soo Choi to ask the question regarding the education curriculum.
Thank you, sir. My question, before I get to the question, I'd like to thank Senator Liu for collaborating with many organizations to make that Senate bill passed. So I'd like to have all participant here applauding his effort to pass the Senate bill. Since we didn't pass the Assembly bill, but we did pass the Senate bill. Although there is some wording taken out of the originally suggested proposed bill. So I think that's kind of a strategy to have a more winning vote from the Senate. So my question is that whether assuming that next session you're going to push that forward again. So the question will be the language that was passed still remain same, or do we have to amend that, or restore the original wording to put that another trial?
Thank you, Young-Soo, for that question, and good to see you. Known you for a long time also. When his hair was all black, I knew him, and I actually had hair. He's asking about the bill in Albany in the state legislature that would require the teaching of Asian American history in all public schools in New York State. That is a bill that I started with Assemblymember Ron Kim, and we did it a couple of years ago at the height of all the anti-Asian hate that we've seen. It is my sincere belief that the long-term solution, in the short term, we can get more cops out there, we can arrest more people, we can threaten them with enhanced hate crimes sentences, but in the end, we have to identify the root cause of racism and bigotry, and that is ignorance, fear and ignorance. Fear from a global pandemic that has claimed millions of lives, and ignorance in that people just don't know a whole lot about the Asian American community. And so it's a lot easier to blame, to scapegoat Asians when we just don't know, when people don't know much about us. So we got to teach the fact that Asian Americans have been part of this country for 150 years and helped build this nation and have struggled alongside other communities of color at the same time. So it's very important to require this. Now, Young-Soo is talking about the fact that we actually did pass it in the state Senate this year. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. And he referenced that we had to change the language somewhat in order to get it to pass. And the question is, what up, Ron? The question is, should we go back to the original language, or should we try to repass what has already passed? Number one, everybody should be aware that when we pass a bill in Albany, either in the Assembly or in the Senate, and it's not just New York, pretty much every legislature around the country works like this. You pass it 1 year. If it does not pass and get signed into law, then the next year you have to come back and pass it again. And so the question is, are we going to try to pass it again? Of course we will. Are we going to stick with the revised language, which is a little bit weaker than the original language, or do we go back to the original language? So the original language was very strong. And it's strong language that I liked. In fact, we had a great effort on the part of the REACH coalition, which many of your organizations are a part of. That REACH organization, after a great deal of collaboration and thought process, came up with the language that I ultimately introduced into the state Senate. Assemblymember Grace Lee introduced it in the state assembly because Ron Kim, our original sponsor, let her have it. She was a freshman assembly member, and so she did her best to push it in the assembly. It was never going to be easy. Now, as much as we have seen anti-Asian hate, you would think that passing a requirement for Asian American history in our public schools should be pretty easy. It's not. And let me explain why. Because in New York State, there has never been legislation that requires the teaching of anybody's history. Now, some other states have passed this requirement. Is there a time limit? Okay, I think I'm going long, but I saw some of your topics here. Each one of these topics is enough for a town hall. Yeah. So I'll try to be brief, but I'm trying to give as much information as possible. Some of the other states, we've looked at their language. What those bills do in other states is simply add Asian American or Asian American Pacific Islander or Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander to an existing list that already requires the teaching of African American history, of Latinx history, of Jewish American history, of Native American history, and they've added Asian American to that list. That's what's happened in most of the other states that have passed this legislation. In the state of New York, there is no list. In fact, for over 20 years, our colleagues in the state legislature have been trying to pass a mandate requiring the teaching of African American history. And that has never passed. And there are about 200 other bills that require some kind of teaching of something. And they have never passed. And that is because in the state of New York, we have a state education department which is very independent. They are not, unlike most of the other state departments, state agencies, the state education department is not controlled by the governor. It is also not controlled. For 200 years, the state legislature has had a tradition of not telling the state education department what to do because the thought has been we don't want to politicize education in the state. And so, so that's been the model for the last 200 years. But now, I mean, I don't really care what the last 200 years has been. We have anti-Asian hate now, and we need to pass this legislation. And so, so we made a slight change to it. That was what we needed to do in order for it to pass in the Senate. Once it passes in the Senate, it becomes a little bit easier next go around to repass it in the Senate and get the Assembly to pass it, which I hope we can do this time. But I think it's going to be using the language that has already passed the Senate. Advocates always want a very strong bill. And I support the advocates, all of you here. But oftentimes what gets passed into final law is some modification. It always includes some kind of compromise. I have never met a bill that has not seen some kind of compromise in the language. And it's not just about Asian American studies, it's about pretty much every other issue, whether it be housing or health care or anything really. Sorry for the long answer.
Can you hear the same topic from the Assembly, on that Assembly bill?
So before we do that, Assemblymember Ron Kim, would you like to introduce yourself? I mean, we know you very well, but yeah.
Did you already go?
I did.
All right. Well, it's always tough to follow Senator John Liu, our good friend, to KCS case, and our partners around the table. John's been, there for us in the city council, as a citywide official, as a state senator, and we'll continue to work with him to make sure that we pass these critical pieces of bills. My name is Ron Kim. I've been in the state. Well, first of all, are we doing translations tonight or we're not? We're not doing translations, okay. My name is Ron Kim, and I've been in the state legislature for 6 terms. This is my 11th year. I sat on the education committee for 10 years of that time in the assembly. I chaired the committee on aging, overseeing older adults and senior issues for the state of New York. And if I can just dive into the question, this is something that John, the moment he arrived and took on the role as chair of the Education Committee for New York City, he put this forward, and I worked with him in trying to get this done in the Assembly. The Assembly has a long history of not doing curriculum bills. That we just don't touch it as an institution. But once in a while, with the support of the entire community, advocates, and organized advocacy, we do pass curriculum bills, and it happens. But it takes a lot of work. But the reason why, as Sean articulated, is that we have a board of regents, and institutionally and structurally, we try not to touch any curriculum, because if we do one, then we have to do 250 others that's been waiting for many years. But it's not like it's an entirely different time for Asians and Asian Americans. It is a time where, for too many years and too many generations, we were told to compete, to try to fit in, put your head down and go to law school. No offense, Richard, and become doctors and just to make some money and you show them all. Like that's the condition that we grew up on. But it's not enough. We need ownership of our communities. We need to make sure that everyone understands we are as every part of the fabric of this country as any other immigrant, any other communities that came before us. And that's what this bill does, sets the foundation that we are part of this history. And now, for me, this is the first step of perhaps the hardest thing that we can do as Asian Americans, which is expand protective rights that we deserve in this country. And it's very difficult to do this in a climate. It doesn't matter what state, what city, what municipal government you go to. We have an administrative deficit in this country, meaning John and I can pass 3,000 bills, but we don't have a city and state government that can administer and execute, enforce those laws. So in that climate, it's easier to be like a Republican right-wing Ron DeSantis types and take away people's rights. Stop teaching people because you don't have to administer those rights. So it's easier to be on the other side of things when you take away people's rights instead of what we're trying to do is lay the foundation to expand people's rights. And that's why we need to get this right. And I'm extremely glad that John was able to get it done in the Senate. Grace Lee, our new co-chair of the APA task force, has done a tremendous work. She led the way and fought through getting the Lunar New Year a recognized holiday when it seemed impossible. She got it done. But next session, this will be at the top of her and others' agenda in the Assembly, and we'll follow John's lead in trying to get it done in the Assembly.
All right, thank you for your response. I should have mentioned this earlier on before we started, but there are those wildfires happening in Hawaii right now. And a lot of our nonprofits are involved in getting the voices out for support out there. So this is not a plug, just a reminder to look into that and support our fellow Americans, our Hawaiians. And we have some from Hawaii also here. So that's I should have started with that earlier. But definitely let's keep them in our thoughts, our prayers, and however else that we can help them out. Moving on to the next question by Reverend Myung-Rae Kim. Can we pass the mic over? Thank you. All right.
Hi. My name is Myung-rae Kim Lee. I belong to the Korean American Sanctuary Church Network. I have a question about the New York Asian American Public Island and Commission. Main question is, as we understand it, Assemblyman Kim has been quite vocal on the importance of the building administrative activity capacity in government, caused in part by over outsourcing and relying on private entities such as non-profits to carry out government functions and service. Assuming these bills are signed into law by the governor, could we have some insight in how we should expect the policy, statewide programs, and public education campaigns to be developed, coordinated, and implemented? This is my questions.
And thank you for your work at the Sanctuary Churches you represent. Thank you so much for everything that you do in that church. For the last 2 years, I've been very vocal about building public capacity to deliver and protect people's rights, and especially immigrant and ethnic communities. One of the first states to actually create an Asian American Commission backed by the state government was Minnesota. This was done 10 years ago, and they already have a $10+ million fund to back that commission. A government body in the state of Minnesota oversees the protection of Asian American rights, and that's the only way we can have a guaranteed continuum of care for some of our most vulnerable people in our communities. Now, it's not just the Asian community. When you have high demand, congested neighborhoods in urban environments, whether it be Black, Brown, Hispanic, or Asian communities, it's hard to keep up with the demand. So what we end up doing is we outsource or normalize giving money to our third parties in our communities without the actual money that's required to get the job done, because we don't want to be holding the accountability part where we have to give the bad news to the people that, hey, we don't have enough money to serve everyone, but here's a nonprofit that can pick winners and losers, and they'll deliver the bad news. That's how we've done it in urban cities for 20, 30, 40 years. But if you go to 2-3 hours away from here, in upstate New York, county governments, local governments are the ones delivering some of the most critical services directly to children, to seniors. They don't rely on third parties. So that's what I mean by building the capacity to get us from endless contracts where we're setting up nonprofits to fail and to converting some of that back into guarantee programs backed by the state government. And this commission can be the foundation in the next 5, 10. It's not going to happen overnight. And but we want to get there in the next 5, 10, 15 years, where we know that once we pass the law to expand the Asian American rights, we have the government to actually back up those rights.
Yeah, I'll just add very quickly that the commission is a very important idea. It was spearheaded by Assemblymember Kim and also in the state Senate by Jeremy Cooney, who is also Asian American. He's from India. The commission is basically, it's exactly what Ron says. It's a formal state government entity that looks at the needs of the growing Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community and tries to figure out how best to address those needs. It passed in the Assembly, it passed in the Senate last year, but the governor vetoed it. So we passed it again this year in the Assembly, in the Senate, and we also have a way to provide some funding for the commission, which is what the governor said last year. She has to veto it because there's no money attached to a commission. You can't have a commission without resources. So we're working with the Asian Pacific, Asian American, AANHPI Equity Budget Coalition to set aside some of the $30 million secured in this year's state budget for the purposes of funding this commission so that the governor has no excuse to veto it again, and that she will sign it into legislation, into law, and then we can finally have a commission here in New York State that actually looks at the needs of the growing community.
All right, thank you. All right, next question by Kenneth Lee regarding the culturally responsive sustaining education framework.
Senator Liu and Assemblyman Kim, thank you so much for your time tonight, and thank you for the service to the community all these years. I'm a member of CASE, and on behalf of CASE, I wanted to ask a question regarding Senate Bill 1402 that mandates a framework for culturally responsive and sustaining education. For the public, if you could explain what this law does, what the current status is, and what we as a community can do to help this pass, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
It's tough to explain because I don't quite understand all the concepts behind it. But let me tell you this is supposed to be, just earlier I talked about how it's not easy to pass a requirement to teach Asian American studies. The African American Studies bill has not passed for more than 20 years. There's 200 other bills. This particular bill was put forth by the state education department in response to all these other bills, including Ron and my bill a couple of years ago, requiring the teaching of Asian American studies. So the state education department said, you know what, please don't tell us what to do in terms of what our public school curricula should be. But here's a framework that I think we can work with, and it includes all of what you want. So the state education department actually crafted this bill. I carried it in the state Senate, and I'm trying to pass it also. But I've also been very clear with the state education department that we'll pass your bill, but that doesn't mean that we're going to give up on the bill requiring Asian American studies in all public schools. But that gives you kind of an idea of where the state education department is. State education department is big. It's much bigger than the New York City Department of Education, which is what most of you are accustomed to. The state education department looks at education all across New York State, including the city and everywhere else in the state. It's responsible for education from pre-kindergarten to high school. It's responsible for running the State University of New York and the City University of New York. It is responsible for certifying physicians, physician's assistants, nurses, barbers, any kind of licensed trade you have, the state education department is responsible for. So they have a huge mandate. This is their bill to include everybody, and I have no problem with the bill, but I think we still need something specific for the Asian American community. And I'll add one thing. Even this CRSA bill, culturally sustaining culturally responsive sustaining education, tries to capture the identity of everybody. When we were discussing in the Senate, Republicans oppose it. They are absolutely opposed to even this kind of totally inclusive bill. Republicans have called it critical race theory. That is a very divisive term in the United States. Republicans mostly do not want to teach African American history. They don't want to teach Asian American history. They just want to teach history because their position is that critical race theory is divisive. And you're telling kids in classrooms how they are different from each other, so their position is that it's divisive. My position and the position of most Democrats is that it's not divisive, it is what it is. We've all faced discrimination. Try to pretend that this discrimination never existed is ridiculous. You have to confront it head on. And the fact that, I'm Asian, I've been Asian my whole life. But I wasn't born saying, hey, I'm Asian. I came to this country when I was 5 years old. I never realized I was Asian. It was everybody else telling me I'm Asian. Somehow I'm different. So I'm not the one who created the difference and the division. I'm trying to overcome it. But you don't overcome something by pretending it didn't exist. Republicans are absolutely against critical race theory. They use it as one of their talking points nationally. They'll probably use it again in next year's elections, national elections. Well, I see it as a different thing. It's recognizing that we have differences and diversity, and that we need to address some of the issues that come with it.
I think Republicans would classify this as a woke, CRT. I mean, they will reduce anything that touches on protecting people's rights and increasing diversity as a radical thing to do. New York Republicans are different. I'm talking about national, Trump, mega, very extreme conservatives are very fearful of losing their power any kind of way, and education and schools is a way to control some of that. So this is a tough fight, but I plan on working with John to getting it done.
All right, thank you so much for those responses. We're going to move on to the next question regarding the UDC Act. Delivering this question is Christopher Bay. Here, you can use this mic.
Yes, so my next question is regarding the Urban Development Corporation Act. But just shout out to CASE, KCS, and everyone else for holding this great forum, and to our great leaders, Senator Liu and Assemblyman Kim, for their steadfast leadership in our community. So mom and pop shops are the backbone of our communities, of the immigrant communities, and obviously there's a lot of rules and regulations, laws regarding code and all of that. And we've seen over the years, especially coming out of the pandemic, how hard it has been for our mom and pop shops to even get by and make ends meet. And to address this, shout out to Assemblyman Kim, who sponsored a bill in State Assembly, as well as Senator Comrie in the Senate, to try to help address these issues and alleviate some of these financial burdens. So with regards to this assistance, my question is, would this type of benefits that go to our mom and pops be automatic, or would these small businesses affirmatively have to come forward and apply for it and go through a long process? And also, for the folks who've been making good faith efforts to comply with these regulations under the UDC, would the amendments be retroactive to help them with their costs that they've invested back into their businesses?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for joining us when we rallied to try to get this passed, and we did that week, and John's full support on this measure in the state Senate as well. The first step is actually to get this signed by the governor. This is a piece of legislation that had been vetoed by the previous governor, but we're pushing it again with the new governor, and it's actually not the Urban Development Corporation Act. It's actually it's the Environmental Conservatory Act. There's about, John probably knows better, there's like 500 plus public benefit corporations in the state of New York. The state controller can't even keep up with how many public authorities that we have and commissions we have in the state, but one of those commissions have directly funded small business support in the past. They opened up their ability to issue grants and borrow for small businesses to give the necessary funding for dry cleaners and beauty salons that often need upgrades because their machines are on a 10 to 15-year-old life cycle. And especially now with the new regulations to update the ventilations and the actual machines, it can cost the mom and pop small business owner up to $150,000 to $250,000 a pop to upgrade one machine. If we're talking about entire ventilation, $500,000, $1 million, it's impossible. So what we're asking for the state, and the reason why we have these type of authorities in the first place under FDR when we actually created some of these public benefit corporations, was to intervene when the private markets are failing, especially in markets that are not performing as it should. And we're not taking over the markets, but we're saying, okay, like in order for this ecosystem to function properly, this subgroup of small businesses may need a little support. We're not saying this is a forever bailout. We're not giving you charity, but we just want to reactivate the market to protect mom and pops and an economy that's sustainable. So that's the intent of what we did here. And if we do it, and if we get it done, we can apply the same theory and same practice to different type of markets, including Con Edison, including all these companies that are not actually performing and failing us in the markets. We can kind of give them a little nudge and say we have the power authority, we have all these other type of abilities as a state to tell the private markets if you're screwing up and if you're predatory or underperforming against the consumers, then we're going to get involved and we're going to reset the market for you.
I'll add something very brief here. I just want to say that this is an issue of particular importance to the Korean American community. Other communities also, there are lots of Chinese Americans and Latinx community folks who are in this business too, but it's particularly important to the Korean American community. And Ron's been championing this issue for many years. He mentioned that the former governor vetoed it. The former governor didn't just veto his bill. They tried to kill this guy politically because of this bill. And Ron said, well, you're not going to touch me. And so, all I can say is that Ron Kim is an assemblyman still. Andrew Cuomo is not a governor anymore. So with that, this is an example of how representation matters.
All right, thank you for your responses. We are moving on to the Senate resolution delivered by Executive Director Eun-kyung Kim.
Thank you so much, both of you. You're doing such a wonderful job for our community, and especially you are having another hat as a Asian American elected official, and then trying to do it another part of the making the community better. Thank you. Especially for this this year, we had this past legislations that is for the resolution J1002, that is for the title was memorializing Governor Kathy Hochul to proclaim May 23rd as Asian Pacific American Heritage Month in the state of New York. This one was, I'm sure it is really significant. And then, but for all of us, we've been doing the Asian American Heritage Month a lot for the past many years. But especially for this year, it was passed. So for most of us, we really don't know much about this bill or the resolution, kind of that terms. It's very familiar with you guys, but for us, regular citizens, we really don't know about the difference between that bill and those things. So if you can explain that to us, and then how this was the significant for our community.
I would just clarify that this is a resolution, and we do a lot of resolutions recognizing symbolic days for our community, and we've done this for many years since Grace Mang was in the assembly. This is something that we take on every year, but obviously the impact it has becomes greater every single year, because when Grace was there, she was the only Asian. When I got there after Grace, I was the only Asian American. But in 11 years, we have 15 Asian. 12 Asian American elected officials. So this is something that has it's not just being celebrated about Asian American electeds now, but people all across the state of New York. But we use this as the impetus and the foundation to get the other important bills that would have a permanent impact in our community. So the Lunar New Year, Diwali, recognizing these holidays, that's ultimately what we want to get, and having the educational curriculum. We use these kind of resolutions to talk about those issues. It's like we're celebrating Asian American Heritage Month, but what do we have for our community? We can't even teach our own kids in Asian American history. Like, those are the type of moments we really make the case on the floor as we're proclaiming this month as Asian American Heritage Month. So that's why it's important that we continue to celebrate and recognize this month.
Yeah, I'll just add that May has been declared Asian Pacific American Heritage Month for 40 years by the President of the United States. So May has been our month for a long time. Every year for several years now, we've passed it in the states, in the state capital, applying to all of New York, and we're going to keep doing it. But I want to agree with what Ron is emphasizing. We will never just settle. Maybe 20 years ago we were happy about a resolution. Yay, we got a resolution. Today we'll never be happy or satisfied with just a resolution. The resolution is an introduction to more serious issues like legislation, actual bills that will require change in how government operates and how people function.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on to the last few pages here. So Professor Eun-Jung Lee from the City Tech at CUNY. Can we pass the mic?
Hi, I'm Eun-Jung Lee. I'm representing Asian American Resource and Information Network. I'm a new face to you, but Casey and I organization with other researchers from CUNY and SUNY, we had a special research project during the COVID-19 period. Actually, the research was to understand what the economic impact and challenges among Asian small business owners and employees. So absolutely, government emergency funding, it played critical roles to help, relieve their burden in some economic burdens. But as you know, I understand that not everyone was able to receive those funding because of their language barriers or their immigration status, kind of that, or sometimes some business owners or even employee, because of their ineligibility issue, they were not able to. We actually interviewed about 37 employees and small business owners actually. So beyond the government emergency program, we found out many small business owners and employees, even though they had a language barrier, they were able to get some information through social media, even KakaoTalk or other, text message by ethnic organization, nonprofit organization, and community-based organization, even ethnic media like KBN or some radio programs, kind of that. So actually, it was really critical for immigrants who are having language barrier. Actually, so we have many, suggestions through our interview data. However, today, I have two, suggestions for you to think about in the future. So we found out that not only, the government emergency funding, but also all the, technology like, information and communication technology and community-based organizations' role are also very critical. So first, can government will be able to provide all the language services through information and communication technology in the future, because we are talking about COVID-19 period, but going back to normal life today, there are still many people who are having language barriers, cannot access those information. So I think if the government can provide more language services in the future, it will be really important for people who are having language barrier. Second is in what ways the government can collaborate and work together with community-based organization more, so the like immigrants like us, we can get access to those information necessary, better in the future. So we want to ask what is your plan or vision in the future?
Well, thanks for those suggestions, and I certainly agree with the suggestions and the premise behind your studies. I think that government definitely needs to do a much better job of, I've never called it language access. I've called it not discriminating against people because they don't speak English well. In fact, there was a United States Supreme Court decision back in the 1990s that required state and local governments to do just that, not discriminate against people just because they don't speak English well. And that means that state and local governments, and perhaps the federal government also, should provide far more services in multiple languages, especially in communities where a lot of people speak that language. So we try to do that. I think city and state agencies are definitely getting better. Do they still have more improvement? Absolutely, especially when it comes to emergency situations. But they are getting better, and we in the state legislature, when we're crafting our annual budgets for the state agencies, the ability for those agencies to provide services in multiple languages is always one of the things that we look at. But language access is not the only thing, because in order to truly take care of people, everybody in the community, particularly in our immigrant community here, I believe it is important to have not just the language access, but the cultural competency. So it's not just about having somebody from an agency be able to speak your language. They also have to understand the culture that you come from. And so I do, look, I continue to believe that our community-based organizations have a role to play, and that government can't do everything. And certainly in a lot of kinds of services, the organizations can do a far better job than government ever will be able to. So you look at the Korean American community, for example, we have a robust system of community-based organizations that have been super successful for the Korean community, so successful that now you got to take care of many other communities as well, right? KCS started their senior citizens center on 166th Street, and originally it was just Korean Americans, but then a lot of other people came because of the great activities, of the healthy food, and a very friendly atmosphere. So I think there is a role for community-based organizations for not just the ability to speak different languages or the applicable language, but also because there's much more cultural sensitivity.
Yeah, thank you for the suggestion and the questions around language access, something that we've been working on for many years as well. One thing that is noticeable from this year, and I'm talking about what's our vision and possible ideas for the future of improving the conditions around language access. We passed the law, and we're still waiting for the governor to sign this, that would allow automatic repeal of defendants in a courtroom if that defendant has sought language access translation, but even an inkling of that translation is off, because it could have a huge impact on the outcome of that court case. It would qualify as automatic repeal, right? So if we apply the same level of standard, let's say someone who's very vulnerable in our community, whether it be a small business owner or a tenant or a senior or whatever, they lose out on public benefits because of the lack of access, of language access, then there should be, we can turn this around and give extra protection to the end consumers so they can have more recourse if there is fault that we did not do enough to provide them enough access to language translations. So that's one way that we can hold government and everyone else in between accountable by centering the solutions around the end user, in which in this case would be the consumers.
Thank you so much, but I just want to say one more thing. Actually, the community-based organization's role is really important. I'm sorry. I just want to emphasize one thing. So, the role of community-based organizations is really important. When we are even talking about language, access. So I hope that the state or government could increase more funding to serve more immigrants in the future. That is really what I want to talk through our the research. Thank you. I'm sorry. Did you hear me?
She says she wants more money.
It's really important.
And by the way, we did get more money, another $10 million this year. So the annual budget for Asian American organizations, community-based organizations, is now $30 million a year, and I expect that will continue to grow because our communities continue to be neglected for a long time, and we actually have to still catch up.
Okay, this next question, we're on the final page. Korean American Chinese Council, I believe there's a few more questions.
Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Jinglan Kwan. I represent Korean American Chinese Council. My question is, there is a very serious housing shortage in the New York State with a high housing cost. It is presumed that legislation is needed in the state legislature to address this issue. Do you have any plans or any action on this in the future? Thank you.
Yes. Number one issue that I can probably speak for John's office as well as mine, that people who come into our district offices, top issue, housing, affordable housing. We have older adults waiting 6-7 years on the lottery to get into senior housing. And we've seen in real time in our community, despite what other communities think we're going through, how we're suffering around affordable housing crisis. Many people think the Asians all live in Park Avenue and went to Ivy League schools and we're crazy rich Asians. But the data shows that 1 out of 5 Asian Americans live in poverty. 1 out of 4 Asian seniors live in poverty. We're the fastest growing minority group that deal with housing and poverty issues than any other groups. So we thought that we could do something this year of significance, but in the last hour, everything fell apart. The special interest groups from representing the developers that only see housing as a way to monetize and exploit from low-income communities had their set of agendas. The pro-tenant group that was there to protect the people on the ground, renters, to make sure that we have enough housing stock, had a different set of agenda. And between those two sets of agendas, we just couldn't meet and find the middle ground to compromise, and the governor just left the table blaming the Senate and the Assembly, even though we did our part to put the best package together for her. But she left and she didn't want to engage. But now she's making unilateral decisions, which is dangerous. Whenever the executive bypasses the Senate and Assembly, does it on their own, it's usually bad news for the people in the back end. The people that need housing the most are not going to get served. So that's kind of where we are, and we have to do a better job of holding this governor accountable to make sure that we have more a real plan to not build housing in the next 10, 15 years, but next 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question housing is the #1 issue facing the state of New York. And, the governor put forth a proposal. It was a proposal that she did not talk about it enough and gather enough support for it, so it fell dead. Then, as Ron said, we came up with a proposal from the legislature, and she didn't want to see it. So I have no doubt that housing is going to be the #1 issue in the next legislature as well, beginning end of this year. How are we going to do that? It's not easy. Affordable housing is a difficult situation. Most people see housing as a way to make a lot of money. We have to change that dynamic. Building housing has to be for providing shelter to people, not just about making money. And that is the mindset that we're going to have to work to overcome. But when we try to overcome, all the people who have been making a lot of money, they're going to resist it. And they're going to do everything they can, including campaign against Ron and campaign against me, so that they can continue to make a lot of money. So it's not going to be easy, but we're going to be committed to it. Thank you.
We are running low on time, so we're just going to limit the question to KFSC and one question from KCS followed after. Okay? So, Yes.
Thank you. Hello, Senator Liu and Assemblymember Ron Kim. I just wanted to ask, just during the pandemic, our hotline calls have experienced 300% rise, and we were actually expecting that number to decline drastically as we were facing post-pandemic, which never did. It was actually a surprise to us as well. It's just, with that being said, the available funding for New York's DV services has either decreased or stayed flat for many, many years prior to pandemic as well. But with the number of the clients that we have to face has been risen, and we are actually very concerned about hearing about, oh, there's going to be a budget cut, and DV is going to be the first one on the line. And what I wanted to ask is that, can we count on your support for DV survivors financially as well as legislatively?
Joanne's talking about domestic violence survivors. Yes. Nay. I think that the governor's original budget proposal did have a negative impact on domestic violence funding. I'm pretty sure in the final budget there was no reduction, and so we're going to be committed to making sure that not only is there no reduction, but there's an increase. As far as domestic violence in the Asian American community, I'm pretty sure that overall amount has risen because our community keeps increasing. So we're going to make sure that Asian American efforts to combat domestic violence and take care of domestic violence survivors continues to increase. But the overall statewide funding for all domestic violence efforts, that should continue to increase as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've supported KFSC in the past with grants and capital dollars and such. But I just want to be very clear, and this isn't no offense to any nonprofit sitting here or KFSC, but there's a difference between outcomes and solutions. And oftentimes, by the time we get to our local nonprofits, it's in crisis mode. We're just putting a series of Band-Aids on bleeding that we can't stop. And oftentimes we kind of change the narrative after these Band-Aids are the solutions, and they're not. And yes, you deserve all the money to put as many Band-Aids on people who are traumatized, suffering today, but it will take government, and it would take the governor, it would take a lot of effort to get to the root causes that's behind the increase of domestic violence, the poverty, the intergenerational trauma. I've seen, like 7 years ago there was a fire in Roosevelt Avenue. Some of the members may remember this, where a husband took his own life, burned his entire family down. The only survivor was I think like a 10-year-old boy, lost his children, his wife, all because of the financial stress and debt that this family was going through. And we see this all across our communities. And when we're faced with one extreme problems, oftentimes we react in extreme ways to that situation. And unless we have the support system, the ecosystem, including KFSC, but also the government to figure out like how do we get to the root causes of this, we're going to see an increase of these type of violence. And I hope that we can all come together as government and nonprofits to figure out a long-term solution to stop this. Because I don't want to march anymore. I want to be celebrating the day we stop marching, and not march more, because that's not a good sign that something is going wrong in the wrong direction. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those responses. Let's try to squeeze in one question from KCS, just to be fair. We have someone? Yes.
Thank you so much. Actually, that was a good call because my questions are a little wordy. So what I'll do is I'll just read the most essential part of a couple of them. So one thing I'm just curious about with community organization impact are just where have you seen the work of our community organizations resonate the most in the decision-making process, especially regarding policies and funding, approaches that you see creating the most impact or have the most potential for things like coalition building. And then just the very last part of the third question, which is, and it's just in reference to all the great things that you have both been doing, are there ways or just guidance on how you can support the work of nonprofits that can help us expand capacity and scale?
That was a lot of questions. I think I can address all of them by talking about what's happened the last 3 years. Last 3 years, beginning in 2020 into 2021, we saw a huge amount of anti-Asian hate. And we did something with it. We talked to all of our colleagues in the state legislature, and for the first time ever, got an allocation in the state budget specifically for Asian American organizations. Many of your organizations, I think, well, not everyone, but most of the organizations represented here were part of what became known as the AAPI Equity Budget Coalition. Successfully fought for $10 million in the first year. That was fiscal year 2022, which was actually passed in 2021. The second year was fiscal year 23, which was actually took place in 2022. That was the second year. With all of your efforts as part of this Equity Budget Coalition, we increased that to $20 million. This year, for the third year, we increased it to $30 million. That money is not to be wasted. It's being allocated to over 150 AAPI organizations across the state of New York. It's led by the Asian American Federation and the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families. These are two AAPI organizations that have a long history of not only giving out money to Asian American organizations, but also to help new organizations establish, as well as set strategy for long-time existing organizations. So, our job, well, speak for myself. My job, I don't have the expertise to help domestic violence victims. I don't have the expertise to build senior housing. I don't have the expertise to combat anti-Asian hate. My job is to provide the resources so that all the people, all of you in this room who have your various expertise matters, that you have the resources to do the work that our community needs you to do. And so to that extent, we're going to try to keep increasing. And by the way, we've been very successful. Look, the more money there is, the more the family is going to fight over it, right? That's what happens. But at the end of the day, we're still one family, and we use the money appropriately. And now other communities, they say, hey, how come only Asian Americans have this fund and we don't? And so, we'll help them create their funds too, but we're going to keep expanding on our funds so that you can keep doing the work at KCS and all of your organizations because you take care of our community. And maybe one day we won't need, it's not anytime soon, but maybe one day we won't need, because people will not be vulnerable on their different levels, and government can take care of everything. But at least for the foreseeable future, we still have to strengthen our community-based organizations.
I'll keep it very quick. I would just say that. What was the question again? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, it's a good question, and I see my job as figuring out how to get us from contracting everything out to guaranteeing those services by the government. It's easy for me to just outsource, say, here's more contracts for you to do A, B, and C, and not be responsible as a government to actually deliver those. But right now we don't have that many choices, as John said, because we're not capable of providing those services, so we have to rely on you. So I would say, for me, I would focus more on if there's a way to build capacity through capital projects to help you expand on this facility. But I would be hesitant to continue to take more government work away from municipal government to nonprofits. We're down, as a government, municipal government, we're down by 25 to 30,000 employees. These are social workers that used to be employed by the municipal government. We no longer have in our system, and we contracted those services out to third parties. At some point, we have to understand that it's not going to be good enough. And you're also going to continuously get set up to fail because by design, we're giving you a little bit of what's required to deliver because we're saying we don't have enough money to serve everyone, so you get to pick 1 out of 3 people to serve, and I get to get away looking good because I gave you the money to serve that one person. That's what we have now, and it's not good enough. So we have to fight for more.
So I forgot there was a back page to this. I don't want to leave you guys out. Ming Kwan, if you guys can say your question real quick.
Yes, thank you. So final questions will be real quick. We all know gambling is a real issue in our community, especially for our seniors. So we see casino buses, right, leaving from Casino Boulevard every single day. And we know that our communities are aging. And we know casino destroys lives. So our question is about the proposed casino that will be built on the parking lot of Citi Field, so which is currently public parkland, which is also part of the Flushing Meadows Corona Park. Casinos devastate communities, and people who live within 10 miles of a casino have twice the rate of gambling addiction compared to those who don't. So considering the potential impact, do you support this specific casino proposal? And also, in order for the proposal to move forward, the State Senate and Assembly must pass the same bill that changed the land designation of the existing parkland. Amendment. So Assembly Bill A 5688, introduced by Assemblymember Arbery and co-sponsored by Assemblymember Weprin, alienate the parkland for the purpose of building a gaming facility. And it currently sits in the Committee on Cities. So if you don't support the proposal, how will you intervene in the legislative process? And will you rally support from other elected representatives, especially in Central and also Eastern Queens?
Richard, I'm glad you let them ask the last question, the toughest question of the night. Look, there are proposals, there are many proposals to build casinos in the downstate area, meaning the New York City metropolitan area, whether it be New York City or Long Island or Westchester. So the proposal that you're talking about is the one at Citi Field where the Mets play. That's one of several proposals. It is not likely at this point. I mean, it's so far away still, nothing's going to happen until next year at the very earliest. And so your question, I'll answer it directly. I'm not prepared to make a commitment on a position right now because there are lots of people in the Asian American community and the Korean American community who want a proposal, a casino right in our backyard. So for the next several months, I'm going to be listening very carefully. I know where Min-Kwon stands on this issue. You've been making it very clear. But look, they're gambling. It's my personal opinion that it's bad. It's addictive. It's regressive. I caution anybody even against buying lottery tickets. I think if you win the lottery, it will be the worst thing ever to happen to you. It will destroy your life, notwithstanding all of the dreams that people have. On the other hand, there are people who talk about the jobs that will be created. And those jobs will largely go to people who live in our area. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. We need to get more information about all of that. So those are the kinds of issues that I think we need to weigh as a community. At the end of the day, I'm going to be listening very carefully to all of you so that I can formulate my own position on this. But right now, it's not something that is coming up very soon. It may not even happen next year. It may be longer than that. And this proposal is one of many proposals. There's a proposal for the Bronx. There's a proposal for Manhattan, for Long Island, for Westchester, and all of these proposals are competing against each other, and each of these proposals has their opponents as well as their supporters. So we will see in the next several months, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, I worked with Stefan Kim before he became the famous Stefan back in the day in doing a story following a group of seniors on a casino bus for an entire day, and they were pretty much homeless. They were getting these vouchers from these casinos in Connecticut, and they were selling those vouchers for like a $10 profit, and that's the margin that they were keeping every day to pay for their rent in a one-bedroom apartment living with 8 other seniors. Like, that's the kind of conditions that many of our constituents are currently living in. But I would push back on the narrative a little bit that they're purposely trying to target that population as their main clientele to build a casino. Like, I'm not saying I'm for the casino, but I don't think that's why, they're not gonna make money targeting low-income seniors. I know that that's the narrative that was put out there by certain groups, that Flushing has a lot of customers that they can attract, and that's why it's a marketing tool for them. I think they made a critical error for them to say anything like that. It's very insulting to us to be treated like that in any community. But I also do believe that there's a huge empty space, and they're going to put, it's not the casino, I think they want to do something there. And if they're willing to sit with all of us, including the local senators and the assembly members, to come up with the robust plan to actually protect the usage of the parkland for public usage. And if they can't finance it, I'm more than happy to entertain some sort of like a battery park authority type where we can actually come in as a state to figure out some of the finance. And there's many different options that we can try to do, except if they don't end up building a casino there. If their intent is to actually do something. So I'm hoping the next few months we can have those type of larger conversations with Steve Cohen and his team, assuming that it's going to be a long road to actually get the casino license. And just the reason, and I'm not defending them, but in order for them to make this work, there has to be a profitable engine as private developers. And you and I know, like, I fought against a lot of private developers, but for them to get the financing, the loans, the construction loans, the LP investors, whatever, like, you need something that they can show that's profitable. And the casino is clearly, with the robust entertainment center, is going to be profitable. That can finance the rest of the space as they're proposing. So that's where they're coming from. But I don't think they're going to get it. It's just, there's too many other bids out there that's too competitive, in my opinion.
All right, thank you so much for these thoughtful answers. And it's one of these important things that we have these discussions together as a community. Because like I said in the beginning when I talked, there are going to be many times that we disagree on things, but it's very important that we all sit together at the table, that we talk about this in a civil manner, we get to a resolution where we're able to come out of this knowing that we put in our fights, and that we walk out understanding that everybody has the best interests of the community at hand. So at that, are there any closing remarks, Senator, Assemblyman?
Let's give a hand to Richard In. All right, well, thank you.
Well, thank you. I did have to type this out. So I'd like to thank and express my appreciation for the both of you for coming here and making this, tonight, nights like this very successful and very informative. I know the two of you have come here several times for the past several years, and we're really, really appreciative that you do come out to the community and spend your time with us. I know you guys are both super busy. So, I also want to thank all the organizations that came tonight to help make tonight possible. All right, it's been a honor and privilege to be able to speak in front of all of you like this. Like a few years ago, I wouldn't have dreamed to be in this position. So thank you to everybody here. We're going to do the thing that we do every year. Can everyone just come up over here? We'll do a group photo together. Okay? Yeah, let's all come up.